Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video. In today's episode we shall be doing another Know Thy Foe. Last time we looked at the Eldar, a very powerful army and one which historically has been top of the meta. But this time we're going to the other end of the spectrum. We're going to take a look at an up and coming army, one which has recently been getting some good results on the tournament scene. It's time to take a look at the smelly invaders, the Sons of Mortarion. Let's delve into the Death Guard. As is tradition, let us begin with what the Death Guard do right. First up, they're a fairly durable army. Not as durable as they have been in the past. They lack a feel no pain, and they also don't reduce damage. But their units are relatively affordable now. They've got some cheap armor, which means they can get durability from mass. And they do have access to a variety of Terminator units and Terminator characters. On top of this, most of the vehicles you're likely to encounter are demon engines. And these come with an inbuilt 5+ invulnerable save, which you know is just going to spike at the worst possible time for the Death Guard's opponent. On top of these datasheets having natural resiliency, Death Guard have a number of tricks that can make them even tougher. Firstly, they've got Contagion. Now, as standard, if you are in Contagion range, and it does get bigger and bigger as the game goes on, you're -1 toughness. But the Death Guard player can then pick another ability on top of that. There are a few to pick from. There are some that can improve the Death Guard's offensive capability, such as giving their weapons extra AP. But the most common one, and I think the most powerful one, is the Contagion, which gives you -1 to your weapon skill and ballistic skill if you're in range of it. For most opposing factions, that means you're going to go from hitting on 3s hitting on 4s, and that is wild. 50% of your shots just going wide, and then you have to try and get past the Death Guard's innate toughness value, and like I said, they're going to be Terminators, and then they've got an invulnerable save. It makes them shockingly difficult to move. For Guard specifically, it hard counters one of our big buffs, which is Take Aim, and shoves us back down to hitting on a 4+, which is not a place Guard players like to be, not a place any shooting army wants to be. And if somehow it gets to the late game and our artillery starts being in Contagion range, that's a nightmare. Because artillery will, even if it's a vehicle-based artillery, will start hitting on 5s, and our infantry artillery will be hitting on 6s. Those shells are just not going to be going where you want them to. And to top it all off, they have a stratagem which gives them -1 to hit, which is Cloud of Flies. So you can be -1 ballistic skill and be -1 to hit as well. And trust me when I say those things stack, because one is affecting your ballistic skill and one is affecting your dice roll. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I will just stay out of Contagion range. That way, I won't need to worry about it. Trust me when I say you are going to be in Contagion range sooner than expected. Firstly, it grows exponentially from 3 to 6 to 9 inches and then beyond. And also, they have ways of spreading it at range. If you come across a Hellbrute and it shoots you, the unit that gets hit by that Hellbrute is affected by the Contagion. So you can't even stay back and shoot them, because they're going to be bringing the sickness to you one way or another. But it's not just durability. Death Guard bring offensive capabilities to the table as well. They have a number of decent shooting units. You have Mephetic Blight Haulers, which come with multi-melters, missile launchers, and they get +1 to wound against vehicles and monsters. You've then got a very popular demon engine these days, which is the Plague Burst Crawler. This comes with a Plague Mortar, and it combines very well with the Lord of Virulence character, which gives it more bonuses to hit. You've got Mortarion, who also allows it to ignore to hit modifiers. That way it's firing indirect but not suffering the penalty for firing indirect, and it's being boosted by Mortarion and the Lord of Virulence. And then they've also got their entropy cannons, which are kind of like pseudo las cannons, but then even if they've not gone for the entropy cannons, they've got the plague spurters, which are like heavy flamers with all sorts of, I think they're anti-infantry 2+ and kind of crazy stuff. So Death Guard shooting, not to be underestimated. But personally, I feel like their combat is where they shine. If you get into melee with them, expect to be on the losing end of it. Firstly, because if you're in melee, you're in contagion range. And so they're going to be hitting you on 2s and 3s, and you're going to be hitting them on 3s and 4s. Even factions which specialize in melee don't like getting up close and personal with the Death Guard. And a lot of their units have access to vast quantities of power weapons and their equivalent. You can go into battle with a basic Plague Marine squad, 10 guys, and 5 of them are going to be rocking either Plaguey Power Fist equivalent or Plague Sword equivalents. Every single one of their Terminators, if it's a Death Shroud, has got a big, huge mega scythe that can slam or it can sweep. And then you've got the Blight Lord Terminators, which are no slouches either, each one coming with a bubotic blade. You've then got the Demon Engines. Well, they've gone for the Plague Flamers on those Plague Burst Crawlers. Then trying to lock those guys up in combat is not a good idea. They're just going to be spurting at you non-stop. And then the Mephitic Blight Haulers have got the Maws that can eat people. They've got the Plague Drones as well, with the Flesh Mowers. And then Mortarion, very common character in Death Guard armies. He's obviously no slouch in combat. And the whole time that you're fighting them, like I said, you're at this disadvantage because of that contagion putting work in. This video is intended to be useful to everyone that watches it, regardless of which army they have. But to speak to my fellow Guard players specifically for a moment, in my experience, when the Death Guard get into combat with you, everything dies. Assume that 20-man blob is going to die by the Emperor's Table. Assume that tank is probably going to get turned into scrap metal. They are surprisingly deadly in melee, and they have loads of tips and tricks and stratagems to make sure they get the result they want when it comes to blade work. I know I've mentioned a few already, but here is a list of units you're likely to encounter if you meet Death Guard in a tournament. Top of the list, you've got the Plague Burst Crawlers, Mortarion, and the Death Shroud. Those 3 seem to be in every competitive Death Guard army. You've then got some of the other Demon Engines, like the Hellbrutes, the Blight Haulers, and the Plague Drones. Sometimes they're in there, sometimes they're not. You've also got Poxwalkers and Cultists. They tend to be just used as cheap chaff units that are going to be doing objectives. And then you have the Plague Marines themselves. Now, some people swear by them. Plague Marines in Rhinos, I personally think are very, very strong. But then you have a lot of Death Guard players that aren't bringing them right now. If you do encounter the Plague Marines, do not underestimate them. I know I've said this a few times about Death Guard, but people do seem to underestimate this faction a lot. I think it's because they had a bad start at 10th. Plague Marines are cheap. They're 160 points for 10 of them, and they come with a buttload of special weapons. Every single Plague Marine in that squad can have a special weapon. There will be no bolters there. Don't think of these as 10 bolter Marines. You're going to have plasma. You're going to have blight launchers. You're going to have melter guns. You're going to have close combat as well. They can take 5 power weapons and power fist equivalents in a 10-man unit. So Plague Marines, whilst they're not super durable, can punch well above their weight. They have a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Attention Guardsmen, this is an announcement by the Departamento Militarum. Element Games is an official sponsor of the Mordian Glory channel. They offer up to 20% off Warhammer 40k and 10% off Bolt Action and other game systems. Use the link down in the description to save money and support the channel. Anyone not using the link will be referred to the local commissariat. Also, don't forget that if you use referral code TIM3921, then you will receive double store credit, saving even more money on your future purchases. That's all for now. Fall out! But that just about covers what Death Guard do right. What do they do wrong? What are their weaknesses? How can we beat them? First and foremost, They are very slow. Oh my god, they are very, very, very slow. Their mobility, their maneuverability is next to none. Their standard infantry is going to move 5 inches. Their Terminators are going to be 4 inches. Because of this, Terminators are more than likely to be put into deep strike every time, and they're going to try and rapid ingress them in. The way you beat Death Guard is you just punish them for being so slow. You counter their deep striking by screening them. 20 Catachans, any kind of scout move, any kind of infantry that just doesn't allow deep striking near them, that is horrendous for Death Guard, because it means that even if they rapid ingress them in, they then only move 4 inches. And then you can start countering them even harder with units that mess with their mobility fundamentally. And with Guard, I would say the biggest counter to Death Guard is the Basilisk. Oh my god. If you have a Basilisk in your army, the Death Guard player is going to cry salty, salty tears. Because the Basilisk doesn't need to kill anything to basically take entire units out of the game. If your opponent deep strikes in a unit of 3 or 6 Death Shroud, and you hit them with the Basilisk, that's -2 to their move, advance, and charge. So if your opponent rapid ingresses in with his Death Shrouds, and then you hit them with the Basilisk, because he has to do that in your movement phase, so you get a chance to shoot him, no problem. His move is 2 inches. So he moves 2 inches towards your unit, which you've screened him out with. So now he's 7 inches away. But his charge is also -2. So it's still a 9-inch charge to you. Not a 5-inch charge, like he wants it to be. 5 is eminently doable. 9-inch was a reason he rapid ingressed in the first place. So Basilisk plus screening, hard counter some of the best units Death Guard have, which is their deep striking and their Terminators. A byproduct of the Death Guard slowness means that when they deep strike in, or when they get out of their rhinos, when they commit their forces, that's where they are. That's where they're going to be on the battlefield. They can't teleport around, they can't do any sort of shenanigans. They are out, and that is where they're going to commit their army. So you know what their goals are going to be. You know what the opponent's game plan is. Because your opponent's going to chuck his Death Shroud down, he's going to chuck his Blight Lords down, he's going to get his Plague Marines out of his rhinos. If he concentrates on 2 objectives, you now know, oh, well, that's where he is. There's no grand scheme about it. It's not like he's going to be sneaking around the flank or anything. It's like, no, he's just going straight forward. And so Death Guard being quite slow forces them to be kind of predictable. But in a funny sort of way, it also allows you to defeat them in detail. Even if they try and leverage their force concentration, you can kind of just out-force concentrate them in many ways. So let's say you've got 2 phalanxes of Death Guard. They're moving into an objective that's in the middle of the board, and they're moving into one that's on the right flank. It might look like that's one big unified front, but it's not. If you wipe out the guys, you start hitting the guys in the middle hard, and you put all of your force into them, the guys on the right flank, they're not going to be able to move over. They're not going to be able to get into combat and start helping out the guys in the middle, because it's just too far away, especially if you're hitting them with things that can slow them down. One thing that I've done in a couple of tournament engagements with Death Guard now is have my Basilisks shoot over onto the flank, and all of my direct firepower goes straight into the middle. And so it completely just neuters them. Because whilst I am winning the firefight, because I'm putting almost my entire shooting into 1 point on the board against about half of their army, the other sort of bit of seasoning in my force, my little bits of artillery, my 2 or 3 Basilisks, are just, which isn't that much points in my army. You know, it's like 300-ish, 300 points in my army. All that's doing, that's just slowing the entire flank down. But the problem for the Death Guard is that their combat width isn't much better. Because they're slow, if they spread out, they really are going to struggle to support the different elements of their army. And one of the worst things that a Death Guard player can do, one of the biggest mistakes they can make, especially against Guard and other Horde armies, is to try and match them across the whole line of the board. Because if they do, they are going to get overwhelmed in local firefights at every single point. Long story short, if you want to beat the Death Guard, you need to defeat them in detail. Take apart their army one flank at a time. However, I understand that so far I've been looking at Death Guard through the lens of them being a combat army. And I did mention at the beginning of the video that they do have decent shooting. And Death Guard shooting is good, but it's not great. It's an arrow in their quiver. It's a string to their bow. It's something that they can do, which in many cases puts them on par with other armies shooting. But they are not a shooty faction. And in 10th edition, it's quite a shooty meta, and there are a number of armies out there, including Guard, which are shooting specialists. And they will not win that firefight. I touch wood here. I don't want to sound arrogant, but I'm just sort of sharing my experience here. As a Guard player, I've not lost a firefight to a Death Guard player since the start of 10th. Their infantry tends to be more combat focused, the Death Shroud having essentially 2 hand flamers each. Plague Marines, bit more to be aware of, but they are only 10 Marine models in terms of durability, so you can knock them down fairly easily once they've popped out of the Rhino or whatever cover they're hiding behind. Our artillery beats theirs. Firstly, Guard artillery is much more numerous. Secondly, it tends to be stronger with more AP and more ways of buffing it. Thirdly, our tanks can get into direct fights with their tanks and often come out. Any Guard main battle tank is either equal to or better than anything the Death Guard put down. Lehman Russes will get into direct fights with Mephitic Blight Haulers, beat them. We'll get into fights with Hellbrutes, beat them. We'll get into fights with Predators, beat them. The Rogue will, and they'll be on par with the Plague Burst Crawler if it's gone for the entropy cannons. If it hasn't, well, the Lehman Russ beats that. The Lehman Russ is our cheapest, most numerous vehicle. The Rogue Dawn will dominate a firefight between Death Guard and Imperial Guard. And then we have Mortarion. Mortarion, who is pretty tough and pretty killy, but definitely not unbeatable. In the last 3 games I've played against Death Guard, I have killed Mortarion in 1 round of shooting. I know that's not something every faction can do, but it's something that Guard can do relatively easily with boost to our AP by Lehman Russ Exterminators and Fields of Fire that we can get for free using Creed. You can put him onto that 4+ invulnerable save without much difficulty. And when he's on that, well, it's 50-50 whether those wounds start going through, and that 5 but feel no pain, it helps, but you can overwhelm it with just the pure amount of damage 3 shots that the Guard has access to. Some may argue that Mortarion absorbing an entire Guard shooting phase is a good trade, but from the Guard perspective, it's one that I'm willing to make. Because not only am I taking out probably your most valuable unit, probably the most expensive one, several hundred points, but I'm also kicking away your force multiplier. That gives me the advantage even more so in the firefight, because now all my tanks are hitting as they were, but yours aren't doing as well now that they don't get to use Mortarion's auras to increase their output. And that just about covers it. In summary, the Death Guard are a tough army with good shooting and great combat, but their movement is a huge problem, and they can be beaten with some fairly basic counters like good screening and forced concentration. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Is there anything about the Death Guard that I have missed that you think I should have mentioned? And are there any units which you think that you are likely to encounter in a tournament Death Guard matchup? Of course, if you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure, and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and Patreons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, and they have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a big shout out to Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys so much. Your incredible generosity is a massive part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time, and it is a big driving force behind the channel. But I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.